Well, hello and welcome to another edition of Conversations from the Edge. We have Peter Mark Adams back with us again. Those of you who remember our spectacular conversation with Peter regarding his previous book, The Game of Saturn, will be thrilled because today we're going to be talking about his second and third book, Mystai, and also The Power of Healing. So Peter, welcome back. It's great to have you.
Wonderful, Mark. Love to talk with you. So it's a pleasure.
Folks who have watched and listened to our previous conversation and continue to do so, because of course they are on YouTube and people can easily get to them. They just love it. Your insight into the Renaissance at that time, and that particularly the tarot deck, which the book focuses on, and what that meant in the broader occult or spiritual underground, if you will, of Europe, was just well received. And now you have, well, not now, but you have turned your attention to two other topics. One is Mystai, which has to do with a spectacular set of initiatic illustrations on a palace that were buried for how long? How long have they been missing from the?
1,000 years, essentially. Yes.
Please reveal them to us, because the book, and I'll just hold it up here. I mean, it's just, it's backwards. Oh, it is spectacular. So please, what compelled you to write this book?
I think that there's some topics which find us rather than we go digging for them. And at a certain stage in life, they become consuming interests. And it's difficult to explain why or how that comes about. Certainly the mysteries of Greco-Roman antiquity and of Egypt have been a lifelong interest. So I could say for like half a century, but I can't account for that. It's just that this topic and the imagery associated with it has a certain frisson, certain charge for me. And it's that kind of draws me into the rabbit hole of what was it that they were doing? What was the process? What were the benefits? Why was it so important that, some writers like Cicero felt that civilization itself rested upon attendance at being initiated into the mysteries of antiquity. So it's a very compulsive subject for me.
Well, I think for all of us, and I believe that to be true, that the foundations of civilization itself are our initiation. It is what allows us to grow as human beings. It allows us to grow and to learn our relationship, not just to others, but to the cosmos. And we see during the medieval period, Nicholas Flamel took the illustrations from the book of the hieroglyphics that he was using for alchemy and painted them on the walls of his house to illustrate the path. He was surrounded by them for over 20 years. This clearly had some effect upon him. We see the same thing happening here. These illustrations of the initiatic path are illustrated there. But it's not just in the forum or in the outer area of the house. This was hidden, isn't that correct? These were in
the peculiar thing about both the Solar Busker, actually, the Game of Saturn, and Mystai, the frescoes, is that they are elite artifacts. And it's only because of that they've survived as they have. Yeah, the villa is on the edge of Pompeii. It's like a 60-room, so many 1,000-meter square villa. It's a very long, but it's divided up into suites. And whereas the front area was more or less open to the public, certainly to invited visitors, the rear portions of the house were entirely private. And within the rear portions, the most rearmost room is the one in which the frescoes are situated. So they were for a small body of initiates only. And it's an absolute miracle that the eruption of Vesuvius just behind the house covered it in this pyroclastic flow of ash and pumice, which amazingly preserved the frescoes until I think 1912, when they were accidentally discovered. And in fact, probably they've suffered more damage in the intervening years from poor attempts at restoration and preservation than they did from the volcano going off. But a few years ago, with a grant from Europe, they applied a very advanced laser cleaning technique to the frescoes. She took a microcosmically small layer off them and restored the frescoes to their full color and vibrancy. And it's as they're seen now that we've managed to capture in the book. So for the first time, I think, certainly in book form, for the first time, you're able to see all the detail within the initiatory cycle of the frescoes.
And the color of the prints is spectacular. I mean, the quality of the publication is very high. We cannot say enough about the publisher. They really did an exemplary job on both of your books.
Scarlet Imprint are notorious for the quality of publication.
Maybe you could take us. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that also the frescoes are painted in the most expensive paints that were then available. You know, the cinnabar, the red cinnabar that makes the background was brought from the Black Sea. It was so expensive that it had its own tax regime and pricing, entirely separate. So no expense has been spent on creating these frescoes. And if you look at the artwork, you will not see quality, lifelike drawing until the High Renaissance. So, you know, it conveys absolutely astounding level of full, almost full-figured, full-size figures on the walls.
Something about cinnabar, some of the listeners may be aware of this, others maybe not, but the use of cinnabar in signature, that is in signing documents, I believe was reserved for bishops only in the church later on. And of course, it does have its relationship to Mercury and some alchemical paths. Maybe you could describe some of the illustrations that are in Mystai, that are in the Villa of the Mysteries, and take us through its value. What does this mean to us today? I mean, it's great to have art, and it's great to know that there was an initiatic elite, and that in some way we may, or some weak way, carry on some of those traditions. But what does this mean to us today as listeners?
If you can allow me to share a screen, I can show some images.
Oh, sure thing. Let me just get that. Share screen. Oh. Ah, there we go. Come on. Oh, I have to click on yours up here, don't I? I have to find you. I'll just make you a co-host.
Yeah.
There we are. Okay.
Great. How is that?
Oh, that looks wonderful. Full size. Beautiful.
Okay. So this is a presentation, but I'll not spend time on it. Let's have a look at the frescoes. So just showing some earlier versions of the deity as he emerged from Anatolia into the full classicized version of him. Of course, all these southern cities in Italy were Greek speaking. They were all colonies of Greek, and Greek continued to be spoken. And really, it's a peculiar circumstance that we have this is the villa, and you can see with the red, that's the rooms, 2 rooms at the very back of the villa dedicated to the mystery initiations. And it's curious that we have this mixture of elite Roman provenance and Greek, traditional Greek mystery initiation. Okay, so this is the preparation room, and passing through this small doorway, we enter the larger room, which looks rather like this. The fresco runs from left to right around the room. The deities are at the eastern wall at the far end there. And unfortunately, there's a big chunk missing there. It's important to realize that this room has two functions. Lit like this during the day, it serves as a theater of memory, because this form of initiatory practice is what we call highly imagistic. It doesn't have a doctrine, it doesn't have a canon of books, and it doesn't have a hierarchy of priests who define what is in and what is out, where the boundaries are. It's very much an embodied, personalized experience of the deity. Okay, but the weakness of that kind of system, of course, is that if the initiatory lineage is disturbed or broken, you're liable to lose the ritual process as well. But here, this theater of memory allows us to reconstruct to a certain extent and understand what the ritual process was. And for esoteric students, this fresco cycle is the only record of a mystery initiation process that we have. We have nothing for Eleusis and nothing for Egypt.
Let me point out something here for those listening and those watching. We see here the black and white checkerboard floor, which is famous in Freemasonry as a continuity of the mystery schools. And also this notion of the memory. Freemasonry is one of the few schools that was, until recently, almost all the rituals had to be memorized. Everything was memorized. And of course, they have what are known as tracing boards, which are illustrations. So we see to some degree a continuity of that practice into the present. Oh, thank you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, these frescoes are highly encoded. They're by no means a simple surface replication of the ritual process, but there's sufficient detail embedded in them for those who know how to read them to recover what the processes were that they were enacting. So, I mean, in an initiatory context, of course, the room would be very dark like this, illumined with flickering torches, candlelight, and that would tend to throw the figures in the room into a kind of semi-animation. So it's almost as though the ritual process enacted in the room would be reflected almost on another dimension by the illumination of the figures around them. Okay, so it's good to bear in mind that the room had this dual function. I want to say one thing about the figuration. This is a mosaic. It's separate from the Pompeii frescoes by 2 or 3 centuries. It's on another continent, North Africa, and it's in an entirely different artistic medium. It's mosaic, not fresco. And yet you'll see that the figuration used in this house of Dionysus exactly replicates that on the fresco walls. And I don't need to explain this, you can see it for yourself. And this suggests to me that the iconography of the mysteries was an established form. Artists would learn how to do the processes, okay? They were not invented each time. They're standardized scenes that we're looking at. So we can be sure that this is not artistic inspiration. It's how the mystery or the mystery sequence should be recorded. So we briefly look at the north wall, if you like, Mark. I don't know if, how much detail you want on this.
Everything. We want it all.
Okay. Okay, for me, the first figure, you can just see the edge of the small door from the preparation room there. This first figure is dressed in a peplos, a Greek dress, okay? She has arm akimbo, she has one foot in motion, she's clearly moving into the ritual sequence, and she's clearly Greek. That's what the artist wanted us to understand. But since he was conveying this to a Roman audience, he's given her the scarf, and she's holding it in a way in which a Roman priestess would hold the scarf. It's called pudicita. It's to show the purity and integrity of a priestess. Okay, but it's clearly a Greek family group. The young child and the woman are probably daughter and stepson, that kind of arrangement. Small boy is in buskins. In a sense, he represents Dionysus. He's reading the liturgy, and she's overseeing his reading, make sure he doesn't stumble too much through it. So that's a family group. We know from other sources that they would be carrying an initiatory lineage of many generations and have probably been hired by the elite Roman family to conduct the initiatory rite. Okay. So the next figure, I believe, is the initiate herself. And there are a number of reasons for saying that. One is that she is adorned with certain flowers, with certain leaves, myrtle, which was the gift to the god of the underworld, because Hades is also Dionysus. She's carrying these honey cakes, which were prepared for funerals. So she is, in a sense, headed to the underworld. And the reason she has honey cakes on the platter is that she is not at this stage initiated. Therefore, she has no protection against the forces that are going to be evoked into the initiatory space. Okay, so she's buying off the Furies, the
child in the fresco,
yeah.
is the child is reading the initiatory text. Is that correct? Do I understand?
The liturgy.
The liturgy. Of course. So the child, I'm just thinking, because we see children occasionally in, just to make it contextual for listeners, in some modern initiatic schools. Amorc, of course, has its Colombe, which is a girl who takes part in the purification rituals of the temple. Okay. And of course, in Memphis Mizraim and some of the Egyptian rites, we see Cagliostro is said to have used a young child, a boy or a girl, as a seer in a similar way. So
we don't know if this child played any further role, but some of them could be as young as like 4 years old. Okay, 4 till pretty well when they 12 or 13 was normally the terminus for taking a role like this.
So puberty then.
Yeah, so it's a family group who function in this way, and it's traditional. Okay. The woman then, who's looking directly out from the wall at us, is offering us a green leaf. I think I've got a better representation. There we are. And she has these special shoes on, which I'm guessing white and red shoes are kid, made from a kid. So we know that special initiatory shoes were prepared. Okay, she has white myrtle on her head, which is appropriate for the underworld. She's offering green myrtle to whoever is looking at her in the room. And I think that's an offer of eternal life. She's inviting you as an observer into the mysteries. I'd say one other thing about the Greek woman. We know her cult titles. One would be Nymphe, that's to say the partner of the deity. The other title she bore was Dracena, that's to say the dragoness. And in this Orphic ritual bowl, you can see the Orphic initiates are gathered around the form of a dragon, which is emanating a force out to them, and they're making ritual gestures in return. So, okay, so that's the first group, essentially. Maybe I'll just go back. I'll mention the second group. They're gathered around, and essentially the woman with her back to us is arrayed as a Roman priestess. She has a particular hairstyle, and she is having either wine or water, we don't know, poured onto a sprig of a green plant, and she's about to flick it towards the urn, the statue that will be erected, I believe, in the middle of the room. It's a short statue of the deity. And at that point, so to speak, the ritual sequence is disturbed because we plunge into a scene which, let me just, in passing, I want to mention that this woman, if you look at the feet of the stool she's sitting on, the artist has depicted them distinctly as mushrooms. And I believe that the extract of the fly agaric mushroom was used in these overnight initiations as a catalyst towards the ecstatic experience of the deity. Okay. So this middle scene then is purely of figures who are on another dimension. So we see the two panisks, one playing panpipes and one breastfeeding a goat. And of course, this is a form of Dionysus himself. And the black goat in front of us is looking out directly again into the middle of the room. So it's a form of Dionysus. The drunken looking figure is mythical tutor Silenus playing the Cathara. And the other figure on the right is often described as the alarmed woman, but I don't think she's alarmed at all. She's giving us a warning that what we're about to see should never be talked about. And if we turn to that, let me find the, okay. So what she is, okay, 1, 2, what she is showing now in the middle of this, unfortunately, large portion lost are the deities. So it's Dionysus and Ariadne. And the hierogamos, or the union of the two, is the mystery, is the core of the mystery. But on the left, you have the cleansing rite, which was called myesis. And before you could enter any of the mystery cults to be an initiate, you had to undergo myesis, which was the initiatory purification. And in this case, it was based on the priest dancing around the initiate. Okay, so it's a very ancient ritual based on the myth of Zeus, both Zeus and Dionysus, being danced around by the Corybantes. Okay, and in different traditions, they would clash sword on shield, or sometimes in Plato, he talks about them jesting and running around the initiate in a confusing way. In addition, the figure again is Silenus. He's holding this deep bowl, which is a divinatory mechanism. And I don't know, we know from the Eastern rites that divination often plays a very specific role in the higher yoga tantra. So a divination is taken before the initiation. And it suggests to me that that practice was also undertaken prior to the main initiation. So on the left is the cleansing or purification of the initiate, and on the right is the start of the initiation itself, in which the sacred objects, the hira, are revealed, and a figure known as Lysa, adorned in Dionysian clothing. She has the buskins, she has the nebris, which is a hide, a deer hide, speckled deer hide, is about to administer the initiatory current. So they've symbolized it as Lysa, who conveys a kind of mania or intensity. So we can move on. Okay, there's a much larger representation. You can see Dionysus has only one shoe on, he's slipshod. And again, that's a tradition which has continued, I believe, well into modern times.
Well, even in Masonry, in the Masonic, one of the
Yeah,
Masonic initiations, you come in
yeah,
without
yeah.
issue. I want to ask about the black goat.
Okay.
Do you believe that the black goat and the connection to Dionysius might be how we see the goat seen as a uh, symbol of witchcraft in the Middle Ages and later on
Uh,
because of the frenzy associated with it?
yeah, I think so. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I think it's kind of lost. It's lost its valence. It's been reframed,
Yes.
in a way in which is it was entirely negative
Hmm. Hmm.
in the Middle Ages. But originally, the fact that the deity looks out through so many eyes um, is a very positive thing. I mean, it's kind of reaffirming the animist view that everything is sacred. You can't kind of partition a piece of nature and say it's evil.
Hmm.
Okay, that's kind of perverse in its own way. So yeah, and the vision of Dionysus in this black goat form is a significant one. It's a vision of unspeakable beauty and power and vulnerability. So this kind of animist transition through death, the easy transition through death, exchanging one form and one energy into another and then into another, is at the essence of this cult. And I think it's one of the great boons that it offered is that it gave you the experience of that essential continuity from life to life.
So they believed in reincarnation then.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, it was at the center, with the earliest inscriptions we have from the Dionysian cemeteries near Pompeii. It's like life, death, life is repeated again and again. It's about recognizing that indestructible essence that each of us has, and which is conveyed from life to life. And when you have the, so to speak, personalized experience and knowledge of that, it changes forever your outlook on life itself. And I think that was one of the reasons that the mysteries were seen as such a civilizing boon, because it raised you to another level of perception about relationships, about society, and about the correct functioning of things. With that perception, you're a lot less likely to wander off the path, so to speak. It's like an anchor against the vicissitudes of life.
Oh, agreed. Agreed. Very much so.
So I'm going backwards. You have to excuse me.
Oh, please feel free.
Okay, so this is the moment of initiation. And again, there's a kind of masterful use of the wall space to have such a dynamic action across the corner of the room. So Lisa, who is this kind of demonic or daemonic, I better not say demonic, daemonic force, is about to administer this thunderous blow, which is a way of symbolizing the influx of the initiatory energy. Okay, it couldn't be depicted in any other way than as a whiplash onto the initiate. And it doesn't mean that the initiate was whipped. Okay, let's dispense with that notion. I believe the initiate would have had access to the muscimol, which is the extract from the fly agaric or Amanita muscaria. And in connection with the intense rituality of the space, that would have been sufficient to trigger an ecstatic episode, which is depicted in the next figure with the golden, almost like a depiction of the aura, the golden cloth which is flowing around the figure. I think that if you're sensitive on the etheric and astral levels, An initiated person who just freshly been initiated would tend to display that color within their aura. I think that accounts for the imagery again. So we're being given a very privileged access into things which are very seldom talked about, Mark, very almost never depicted. No comment on that, Mark?
No, it's true. It's so spectacular. And, you know, the comment that you've made, and we cannot reinforce it enough, is that the initiatic process here is an elite, and that this is it is not simply reserved for the elite. It then ripples out into the social structure in terms of the civilization itself.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that so many of it is women, because those of us know that women are the civilizing factor on men.
Yeah.
And
certainly,
it's true.
yes.
If one looks at the American Wild West, it was only when women started going out there as teachers and preachers and the mail order brides that some of these guys started shaving and showering. I mean, we laugh about it, but it's true. It is a civilizing force on us. So
we have to recall, though, that this elite Roman context is resting upon several layers of conquest and on a slave-owning society. There's by no means equality in connection with this elite ritual space. And that's kind of the paradox of it, isn't it? That it was civilizing, but on the other hand, it wasn't capable of reforming the larger society. And that wouldn't happen really until Christianity became a significant force, even though Christianity went on to suppress the initiations, suppress the mysteries. It nevertheless let vast numbers of people out from servitude. And it's an interesting contrast in the evolution of human thought and society are kind of encapsulated in these frescoes. It's another level.
I think it's cyclic. I think the problem there is it's cyclic, that the amount of people at any one time engaged in serious spiritual practice is always a small number. It may not change percentily. So we're kind of spoiled today because we have this beautiful advantage of you're there in Istanbul and I'm here in northeastern Pennsylvania, and we're chatting on this, and people are going to watch it, and we have access to so much information at our fingertips, probably just around us, that there is a false egalitarianism that is often promoted in spirituality today. That it's always been elite in many forms. That we cannot take the elite aspect out of it. And that as a result, it may not. This is just, of course, something I believe, because it has an effect on the wider society, but that notion of some kind of collective enlightenment taking place, I believe, is a false ideal. I think it's a dangerous and false ideal, but that's my view. And I think because we look historically, it's always been a relatively small group.
It has historically, And even the fact that we're able to see the frescoes at this level of detail, I mean, they haven't been seen like this since they were uncovered, or better to say, they haven't been seen like this since they were painted in the 1st century. Because when they were uncovered in 1912, they were covered in smoke and debris, and so we're really privileged. Only in the last, a couple of years ago, they were cleaned with the laser technology, enabling us to see all this detail for the first time. So, how did you say? Let me comment on this one. This is one of the final sequences or the final stage of the ritual sequence. And what's happening here is the attendant in purple is holding certain tresses of her hair. And we know that what they're doing here is a hairstyle known as the senicrine, which was characteristic of a Roman priestess. Okay, and it's significant that again the figure is looking out away from the mirror, which is proffered to her by a mythical creature. Therefore, it's a symbolic mirror, not a real one. But her reflection, she's not looking at her reflection anymore. She's looking out into the room. And again, the invitation is clear that through the initiatory process, you can release some of the material attachments, which in Orphic tradition were the great magnet for drawing souls into incarnation. Okay. So in a sense, the initiation process has cleansed her of that materialism. And it's again interesting that it's in this elite context that that is taking place, because these were the richest and most powerful individuals of the age. There's no doubt about it. Probably the family who had the fresco cycle painted, who conducted these rites, were amongst the Roman elite of the elite, probably governing the city, and therefore related to Gaius Sulla, who conquered Pompeii in the social war, which had finished just decades earlier. So again, the paradox of elite power, wealth, and freedom from material obsession is a strange juxtaposition in our eyes. So yeah. And the final figure is so-called domina. Now, what's important here, I think, is often missed, Mark, is that she's sitting on a couch, the other half of which disappears into the wall. And I think, again, read on a symbolic level, the initiate has a union with the deity on a different dimension. So she's literally the spouse of the deity, so to speak. But that relationship is on another dimension.
So it's what we hear of to use the phrase, the alchemical marriage.
Yeah.
The marriage and erotic symbolism that we see carried out even through Christian mysticism, alchemy, Kabbalah, God's spouse. This is repeated here in this fresco.
Yes. Okay. Yes, absolutely. And again, it reflects the figures on the east wall, Dionysus and Ariadne, kind of holding the deity. So she in this female context, she's acting as the proto-Mystai. You know, she is the initiate, and by mirroring her behavior and qualities and character, you come closer to the deity.
And again, we see her dressed in gold, but what is the other color? Is that
I would say it's purple, which is
purple.
The characteristic color of Dionysus. From the earliest descriptions of the god, he's described as wearing a purple cloak. And the strange thing is that I'm not sure. I think it has to do with the aura. With the initiatory energy that deity is most closely connected with. I think purple would probably be the, and the other color is saffron and purple. And again, I passed it very quickly, but earlier there was a mosaic from Zugma in southern Anatolia depicting Telete, which is the initiatory energy itself. And again, it's purple and it's saffron. So it's the closest you can get to gold and purple as the defining. I'm sure that some people can make some Kabbalistic analogies between those colors and the tree of life, possibly. I'm not competent to do so myself. So yeah, I think that's it. That was a real fast tour of the mysteries of Dionysus.
It's a spectacular tour, though. It's I truly hope that our listeners get online and order a copy of your book, because it's again, looking at as with Game of Saturn, the immense amount of information and learning that is in them, and things to use, how you decode and analyze the symbolism is very important, because it's a working prototype for us when looking at things themselves. Because as you've noticed and you've pointed out, the devil's in the details.
Yeah, it is.
Why they're looking out, not or looking away. They have a shoe on, they have a shoe off. And we see, as I've tried to point out to the listener, we see some continuity of that through various initiatic traditions, even to this day. But absolutely, how easy it is to lose the meaning.
Yes. So, I mean, from my perspective, this fresco cycle is the single most important esoteric narrative that we have from that lost world of Greco-Roman mystery tradition, and a tradition which certainly in people like Herodotus and others, they saw as a pale reflection of the Egyptian mysteries. So they saw parallels between the mysteries of Osiris, for instance, and the mysteries of Dionysus. So if you're discerning enough, you may be able just to see the shadow of the Egyptian mysteries behind this fresco cycle. It's certainly there.
Well, that's important to remember, that the Greeks held the Egyptian mysteries to be the highest initiatic source of their time. And even the Egyptians, if I remember correctly, referred to the Greeks as children. In that same light. That so there's still more to be discovered, possibly even within the Egyptian architecture that has survived, because their entire culture, unlike the Greco-Roman culture that you've just given us a tour through, where this was reserved for an elite and others had their own maybe practices, the culture of Egypt from top down was imbued completely with this magical mythos.
Yeah, it was a sacred culture, from the pharaoh down. There's very few Romans or even Greeks saw their leaders as sacred in any way. They were as simple as that. They certainly were not the children of the gods. So yeah, that cultural degradation had occurred long before. So yeah, but I was thinking as well that the Game of Saturn depicts a theurgical operation. Okay. And if we think about it, the primacy of Kronos in the Greek system that is behind that theurgical operation directly reflects the cult of Amun-Ra.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, if you can discern the connections, I think even in the solar buska, there are faint echoes of the cult of Amun-Ra in the theurgical invocation of Kronos, certainly energetically.
And we're looking at Saturn, Kronos, as in this sense, and of course we have to remind our listeners who may be nitpicking at us, that particular as with my statement about the black goat, that over centuries many of these ideas become conflated, distorted, even intentionally manipulated or abused by those who are against them. Sometimes all we know about some of these practices are by the people who were against it, by the enemies, because that's the only literature that survived. So we have to be very careful. But is the notion of time here, limitation, seems to be what we're talking about. What are the limits of creation itself, of life itself?
Well, on the larger cycles, of course, where the information or the tradition that the Egyptians claimed to know, and which they saw the Greeks as children in respect of, because they didn't understand the cycles that govern life on this planet. And I think, you know, maybe if you look at some of the American Indian Hopi traditions and other Pisani traditions, you have a sense of a much bigger screen against which events are playing out. That there are certain major phases. I mean, certainly the Greeks had their age of gold and silver and so on. And we certainly seem to be on a helter-skelter, which approximates to those phases. But I think what we're missing is the sense of interdimensionality against which those phases are played out.
Could you elaborate on that?
Well, yes. I mean, there's, for instance, these days, a lot of stuff going on about UFOs or UAPs or whatever they want to call them. That, for me, is a dimension of interdimensionality that is crossing our screen, our visual screen, so to speak. But there are other dimensions that cross our screen, which are far more intangible. And I would prefer to characterize them as deities or as higher order beings. That's to say, they're on a spiritual scale rather than on an interdimensional scale. And don't ask me to try and justify that characterization, but it seems to me intuitively right that the kinds of entities and beings connected, for instance, with the higher yoga tantra, with the mysteries, were of an evolutionary scale of spiritual advancement. Okay, they suggested a pathway for us to become more than what we are. The interdimensional stuff, though, seems to be a kind of interference. And it's difficult to, looking around the world today, to see that as a positive force or influence on humanity. I believe we're in dire straits in many ways on this planet. And the picture going forward is not a good one. And within frameworks, for instance, like the Hopi, these various ages do not have a positive outcome on a material plane. So it's kind of forcing us to take stock of that and to reevaluate what it is that we're doing each individually in the course of our lifetime. Okay, so these forces are definitely at play.
And this is one of the great questions that has gotten a great deal more attention over the last few years is, are the deities, are the gods, are the angels, archangels, whatever we call them, are they independent beings, or are they psychological projections, archetypes in our head? And I say the question itself is a false question, because it says it has to be either or. The point is it's both. Because as we go through the initiatic process, we're expressing more and more of these qualities that exist within ourselves, that may in some way exist in a more perfect way already outside of us. For example, you know, I can study writing all I want, but until I write, I can't become a writer. And I have to identify with someone who is a successful writer. So those people who are successful at writing are in their own way an incarnation of those mercurial energies of Thoth, of Tahuti, of any of those gods. We are an embodied incarnation to some way of that, of those influences, which brings us to the question of the nature of spiritual influence, or I don't want to use the word possession, but that's what we're talking about. To be enthusiastic about something has its roots in the notion of to have the God actually take possession of us.
Yes.
Maybe you could elaborate a little on that and how that relates to the mysteries.
I'd like to show you a photograph, if I could.
Please.
Which bears on this issue of the, so to speak, objective nature of the energies. Where are we? Full screen. Okay, is that visible?
It is completely visible, full screen.
Okay, what we're looking at here is a Reiki group of teachers who've just been initiated, and this is a photograph, of them, the get together after the training is over. And on the left is my partner, and as you can see, she's just invoking the Reiki energy. And the visual effect of that is to generate this field. Now, I took these photographs myself. I had a cheap little 2001, one of the first digital cameras, and I took this photograph, and the flash immediately was reflected straight into the viewfinder, into my eyes. I was saying, well, what's wrong with the camera? I just bought it. So I took another photograph, and it happened again. This is 2 seconds later. And I took the photograph again. It seemed better. And then the fourth one, finally, okay, camera's working now. It was only when I uploaded these images that I realized that what I'd captured was actual objective externalization of the Reiki healing energy, because it had wanted to be captured. And the effect of the energy is to illumine the aura of some of the participants. And you can see quite clearly this woman in red on the right has a distinct aura around her head. Okay. So the energy is both an external energy, it has agency, it chose to manifest, and it was able to illumine the natural qualities of the people themselves. So, as you say, both internal and external. It's not one or the other, but it's definitely there. It was there in such a density that it reflected light as though it were a mirror. Okay, it had that much tangibility to it. Okay, so, and then it's gone. Okay, that total sequence is 8 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
That was it. Okay, I'll come out of this, stop share. So I don't know if that helps to answer the question.
What kind of takes us into your third book, and The Power of the Healing Field. And just for listeners to understand this, you sent me a copy of the book, in manuscript form. I took a look at it, and it was very good. And I sent it to Inner Traditions at your request, and they enjoyed it so much that the turnaround time between receiving the manuscript and I think making you an offer was very, very short, because it was simply just a very fine book on healing. I don't know what else to say. It is what it is. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on this book. What makes it distinct from other books on healing, and how it may be helpful to people, particularly in their initiatic journey.
Okay, I have a lot of thoughts about this, actually, Mark. And I think, because I've been through a long process now, it's like 6 months since it was published. And I did a lot of talks and various podcasts, that people can catch up on, in which I went through it in quite some detail. But as a result of that, it struck me that for many people, healing is getting well, having had a defined illness. And that perspective is an incredibly cramping and limiting one. Okay. So it has, in our culture, healing has a limiting connotation. It's almost as though you have to say, yes, I felt sick, therefore I needed to do something.
A friend of mine years ago mentioned that to me. He was a therapist, and he said, for many people to simply rest, they almost have to be sick before they'll take a day off to rest.
Yeah.
There has to be something wrong in order for them to allow themselves to take care of themselves.
Yeah. So healing has to encompass not getting sick in the first place. Okay, so that's the first step. Also, we need to recognize that we live in a self-medicating culture. And that means the food, the drink, the tablets that we consume compulsively are masking underlying emotional issues. And most of us dwell on what I just said. Yeah, that makes sense. It's the chocolate or the alcohol or the whatever that we need in a kind of compulsive manner. But we don't recognize that what we're doing is self-medicating. In other words, we're engaged in patterns of emotional suppression rather than dealing with the emotions, okay? And the addictions, therefore, which underlie many people's behavior, are never contextualized in a way in which they're ready to engage with them and sort them out. Because the self-medication is ultimately leading to or leaving us open to serious illness. So again, it's that preventive mindset is not really there, it doesn't engage, because it's so much easier for us to turn to consumer products to do the job of temporary emotional suppression, okay? So the problem, and especially in the current context that we're in with COVID, is that that self-medication tends to reduce the effectiveness of our immune system. Okay, so we're leaving ourselves more open to more serious illnesses through this strategy of self-medication, okay? And the reason that it's unfortunate is that there's a general lack of awareness of how far energy medicine has progressed in the last 30, 40 years, okay? In terms of its accessibility, ease of use, and effectiveness. Each and every one of us can get on YouTube, learn how to do emotional freedom techniques, for instance, Gary Craig's simple tapping routine. And Dawson Church has demonstrated in a couple of clinical trials that just tapping with EFT has been sufficient to eliminate post-traumatic stress disorder, which is the most extreme and intense, one of the worst anxiety disorders known to humanity, and almost totally beyond conventional medicine to deal with it. And in 2 sessions, they knocked it down from post-traumatic stress disorder to a minor anxiety, and thereafter to elimination. So it's absolutely phenomenal that we can do that today, and yet nobody ever talks about it. And in fact, Gary Craig demonstrated this in the 80s. I remember he made videos at one of the veterans hospitals, helping people with post-traumatic stress disorder from the Vietnam War. And yet you see no trace of a change in behavior or societal attitudes to the PTSD that so many people are suffering today after 20 years of almost constant warfare. Okay, so there's some disengagement within our society that is highly toxic, that on the one hand encourages this self-medication with alcohol, foods that tend to inhibit the efficiency of our immune system, and the availability of techniques and tools which are highly accessible, easy to use, and highly effective. And really, I wrote the book to try and illustrate this fact, and to illustrate it with as many of the most extreme and extraordinary cases that we have experienced in the 20-odd years of our own healing practice. Okay. So that's my run-in to the book.
I was first introduced to emotional freedom technique 4 or 5 years ago
Yeah.
by a fellow who was a health practitioner, both in Oriental medicine and a naturopath, but also was going
Yeah.
for a degree. He was getting his degree in nursing as well. And because, of course, we'd always joke, traditional medicine is nice until you need trauma care. Trauma care is something we do exceptionally well with Western medicine, and we need to recognize that.
Yes.
But he was a veteran of the Israeli army, and he was the one who pointed EFT out to me with regards to the research at that time, which of course you had mentioned with regards to PTSD, and that when we look at post-traumatic stress, and having taught many veterans through different educational programs over the last 15 years or so, we're looking at not just those who've been in the military as having traumatic experiences, but in increasing levels of traumatic response to situations in day-to-day life.
Yes.
That we're seeing people who are increasingly unable to deal with just basic problems, and looking at how folks drive over here increasingly is one way of looking at it. The inability, because we've joked about it recently, said, and of course it has to do with what we'll call the new immigrants, all the folks who've left New York, now have decided that red lights don't matter there, so red lights don't matter here either. But that is a high level of stress, because driving, as much as we don't want to admit to it, is an extremely dangerous activity.
Yeah.
When it goes very well, it goes very well. And when it doesn't, people die. And we don't like to think of it that way, but those of us who've been doing it for a while, we know that's what's really at stake here. So you have to pay attention. But then you look at it, other areas of life, and even the past several years with COVID, that has been extremely stressful for people. And a lot of it they have brought upon themselves because they have denied a lot of things about reality. And one of the things I've said over the last 5 years or more is get right with Saturn. Saturn is ultimately about reality. You've got to get right with what's going on. So, but at the same time, the stress of losing jobs, of being stuck inside, of wondering, is this medication that I'm being told to take, is this good for me? Is this potentially dangerous? What are the possible negative side effects down the road? There's a tremendous amount of stress, and not asking the questions or avoiding the questions is not the answer. That just creates more stress. So it does create a condition, as you've pointed out, that I would hesitate to use the word explosive, but that's really what it is. Pressure just builds up and then people pop. And they need a way to manage that before that happens. Not manage it. I think that's even the wrong word. Manage is, we think, like putting it in a box, but actually learn how to solve their problems.
I think it's dispelling the anxiety so that you can begin to manage the problem, deal with it. Absolutely. So I see the energy techniques as really in this area. Say they're not part of the medical establishment, and because of that, they tend to be overlooked. There's not I still talk to people about EFT and they've never heard of it. It's extraordinary how many people, and that's true as well amongst people who are into alternative culture, into esotericism. It's almost like the entire revolution in energy psychology has passed them by, so that you're left really with techniques, I suppose ritual techniques, in an attempt to reestablish a state of inner equanimity and harmony, higher energy, which are all good things, but they need supplementing. You know, one of the things that became clear from our 20 odd years of practice is the depth of some problems. I mean, this model of the mind as kind of your conscious awareness and your memory and your unconscious memory, and that's it, is highly misleading. I mean, again and again, we have cases of trauma in the womb, for instance. And then we have trauma connected with traumatic deaths in past lives. We have familial trauma and ancestral trauma. So that, you know, it becomes an incredibly rich cake you're dealing with. And as you begin to address the blockages and the energy cramps, let's say, in this extended field of consciousness, it changes your relationship to reality in fundamental ways. So the people who had problems with family, with people in authority, so on, dealing with these issues, all of a sudden those background issues disappear and are harmonized. So the way to access this larger field of consciousness is through energy psychology. It is the gateway. And within that, there's 100 techniques you can use, and you can choose which ones appeal to you. You know, that's part of a much bigger conversation, Mark.
Well, it ties into what we talked about earlier on with the notion of purification.
Yeah.
And then within the initiatic cycle, you had to be purified. And this purification has a symbolic, and boy, I don't even like that word, because what we mean by symbolic is something that isn't really there.
Yeah.
That's what we're really saying. When we say symbolic, we mean something that isn't really there. It's a stand-in. It's a placeholder for something else.
Yeah.
And what we mean by symbolic is something that's really there, but being expressed to us in a manner we can possibly digest. We're giving a reality to the symbol. It's not just a placeholder. It's an expression of the thing.
Okay? Yeah, there's real cleansing going on. Yes,
there's real cleansing. So we have the baptism, which is a cleansing, of course, and even baptism sometimes in some of the Catholic rites involves fire, a candle as well. The Father holds a candle, and then there's, of course, the water, which we think of as the baptism. But we think of the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, but people never really ask what they're banishing. They just kind of go through it. They don't think, what are we getting rid of? And when I wrote Kabbalah for Health and Wellness, the first practice in there was a purification practice. And because the idea was, what do you mean Kabbalah for health and wellness? This is supposed to open me up to cosmic planes or inner energies or get me stuff I want. What are we talking about? Well, you gotta empty the wineskins if you want to put new wine in them.
Yeah.
You know, you got to clean the pipes before you put new water, or the pipes are going to get cleaned in your life. The energy moves in and through us. So we're going to get clean whether we like it or not. We just we want to do it ahead of time so that we like the outcome. It's easier on us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that notion of purification was both resisted by many people, but at the same time, others, it was spectacularly eye-opening. And they said it was one of the most important practices they'd ever learned, because and practice really is the conceptualization of it, that this purification is essential. And you talked about it in Mystai, but really that's what you're saying, if I understand you correctly, when we talk about healing. This is a constant, ongoing process of, just as we wash our hands, we have to learn to wash our minds and our emotional psychic structures as well.
Yeah. So the essence of a technique like EFT, and there are others, you know, mind connection healing and TAT and so on, is that you have a mechanism that you carry with you all day, every day. And you use it whenever a situation arises that you sense a disturbance in connection with, so that you kind of progressively purify the energy body. And it's at this point that energy psychology and healing become an integral part of your spiritual and personal growth and practice. And that's what I'm trying to get across. Healing is not about getting sick and recovering, although that's part of it. Healing is about not getting sick, and it's also about becoming a higher level of inner integrity in your energy body, in your spiritual and personal life. That's why these healing techniques are absolutely essential. And they fit in so well with techniques like the Kabbalistic ritual, which are essentially bringing in high frequency energies into the energy body to further raise awareness.
Well, and to give maybe a very poor analogy, as we're doing this across the day, it's like across the day, hopefully you're washing your hands.
Yeah.
You know, you're not just washing them before you eat at the end of the day once, that we come in contact across the day, I mean, with germs of all kinds. And they say you should wash your hands about 5 to 6 times a day. I often do because of where I once worked, where we're constantly getting things dirty with people. You just make a habit of it. And that habit, you know, healthy habits last a lifetime. Well, healthy habits extend your lifetime. So we're building healthy psychological habits here that help us, instead of waiting till the toxicity builds up to the point where it's a problem, we can let it go in much lower doses.
Yes, indeed.
Wonderful.
And I think another aspect of this is that acupuncture has this concept of GUI, which is to say fragments, energized fragments. They may be from people who are deceased and who have died unexpectedly and seek to attach themselves to other people's energy bodies. And if your energy body is on a low ebb anyway, it's very open to this kind of attachment. And this is a very specialized area of energy healing, but nevertheless, it's a real one. And although the cases of this kind of low grade possession are fairly rare, they certainly do occur. And people need to be cognizant of that as well.
Well, I mentioned that in our monograph on poltergeists, obsession, possession, and poltergeist, and it had to do with parasitic energies. And
yes,
I personally believe, from what I have witnessed in many areas, that those parasitic energies are far more common than we'd like to believe.
Yes,
and I think that they're increasingly common, and a very dangerous thing to do is to get engaged in a lot of ghost hunting, for lack of a better term.
Yeah,
because I just want to say, you had mentioned how the energetic healing is so disassociated or fragmented from other areas of research. And what I noticed is that people involved in parapsychic research are completely disengaged, even up on the higher professional levels. They're completely disengaged from traditional psychic, traditional metaphysical, traditional occult practices. And this disengagement is what is incredibly problematic.
Leaves them incredibly open.
Open, right? Because that's exactly it. It leaves them open.
Just give me 1 second, please.
Please go
Mark.
ahead.
I have to let this cat out.
Oh, go to it. And that is why my dog is not in the room with me, because right about this time she'd be perfect for the first hour, and then she'd say, but Daddy, I need to go out now. So that's all right. But this is about integration. They didn't have this problem in the traditional mystery schools.
Yeah,
because these things were all integrated.
That's right. That's right. And I think as well, this thing about ghost hunting, this sense that people need to answer questions about, which are essentially metaphysical questions, by becoming consumers of that, so to speak. Because these are shows, people are making money from the shows and the advertising. Let's face it, it's a commercial enterprise. Kind of leaves the fact that people who have unsuccessfully transitioned, let's say, need help,
Mm-hmm.
that this is a dimension of healing and of the healing practice, is to assist people in the transition process. It's not a spectator sport.
Oh,
Okay.
agreed. And
You know,
it's
it's an ethical it's an ethical issue, essentially. I mean, if you see somebody knocked down by a car in front of you, do you help them or not? You know, it's an ethical issue. You'll feel it in yourself that you want to help, although you might be frightened of helping. That's a different thing. You may not be competent to help, but the urge to help is there. But I think with a lot of kind of entity related phenomena, there's a kind of voyeurism about it, about satisfying a curiosity, and the failure to recognize that what you're dealing with is other life forms. And some of them are in highly problematic situations.
I think you're being extremely polite in your description too. I mean, it becomes a kind of perverse pornography in a way, in that with that, there is an abuse of these entities. There's an abuse of these people. I saw one show in which the person said, well, you know, I want to, and we're going to assume that everything here is true. We're going to make that assumption.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I'll buy that house off your hand because I can use it for research. Yeah, this is not something that you should be researching. These are sentient beings, and they're in trouble, or they're incredibly hostile and violent. Either way, this is not an object of research. This is something that needs to be resolved, because paranormal phenomena, particularly that which we would consider parasitic and extremely negative, is also contagious.
Yes.
There's psychic contagion which takes place, and it is clearly marked out and demonstrated in neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So once it starts in one place, it takes time, but it can potentially spread to other areas in that neighborhood.
Yes. I mean, possession itself is contagious.
Yes.
Whether it's the positive possession of enthusiasm with a deity, or the negative with a parasitic entity that simply wants to consume the life force of somebody.
Hence the madness of crowds.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I mean, the problem is with our culture, we fail to recognize the interplay of these dimensions in day-to-day life. You know, although our media is full of them in an entertainment form, the actual translation of that to our day-to-day lives and what we do is not taking place.
Well, David Metcalf and I have kind of discussed that length in different conversations, which listeners can listen to. And one of the dominant themes that we see, and I say this is important because people are increasingly getting their metaphysical views from entertainment. They're not getting it from teachers or what we would call a priest or clergy. They're getting it from entertainment, commercialized entertainment. And with that being said, the fundamental nature of the show has to be one of some kind of stress or angst, some kind of conflict, and the conflict has to be overcome. So what we see is evil is always present, and it's always right there, and God is absent. God is absent, and this is of course just a simple way of looking at it, but we can say good is absent, evil's present, and humanity is kind of floundering in the middle of this, trying to figure out what to do. And maybe if you're lucky, some kind of superhero savior or gunslinger, metaphysical gunslinger, so to speak, will come in and save the day. But it does not provide for a good metaphysical or cosmological worldview.
It's unhealthy. I mean, this is as true of the original film Exorcist as any of today's. I mean, it's a very bleak and pessimistic outlook. and it tends to exaggerate the phenomena at the expense of the phenomena that are ever present, are much lower grade, but nevertheless persistent and need handling. They don't need glorifying.
Glorifying, exactly. That's the word that is being done. It's getting glorified.
Yeah.
So the need for the phenomenal experience is, okay, now I believe in maybe life after death, but what has this done for your real spiritual path, for your real awakening?
Yeah.
We don't see a lot of that taking place. You've peeked behind the curtain, but
yeah,
okay, what have you really seen?
So the contextualization really is very much absent. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
So,
well, what is it that you would say to folks? What is the message really that you would like to give listeners about the totality of your work? What are the messages, the things that they can take away and maybe even practice or seek to apply in their day-to-day life?
I'd have to say, first of all, that everybody who is devoted to personal and spiritual growth and development needs to master one or two of the modern energy psychology techniques. And when I say master, they have to be able to employ them on themselves and on those around them as need arises. So mastery is mastery. And whenever you are successful with these techniques, there is a distinct shift in the person's energy body. Okay. Without that, you don't have change. So that'll be the first thing I'd have to say. And beyond that, we need to be far more critical, I think, of the culture, in the sense that it tends to provide all of this matter for us to consume on a kind of non-reflective, uncritical basis. You know, we are being poisoned with the foods that we're consuming, and we need to be aware of that. You know, sugar is a poison, and whether you get that sugar in your system through alcohol or chocolate doesn't matter really. You need to recognize what's happening. You know, your immune system is being undermined by the food that you eat and the things you drink. And I don't think COVID is going to go away again. However it came into the public sphere, I'm not going to talk about that. However it arrived, it's here now, and it's not going to go away. And it may well change again into other forms. I don't know what the mutations are going to be, but it looks like it's starting to pick up again. So this issue around the immune system is a critical one. Okay, it's become kind of unavoidably central to our day-to-day lives and our ability to continue functioning properly. But beyond this, the realization that our energy body is also our pathway to personal and spiritual growth and to a higher order of being on an evolutionary scale is essential. And I think that's where the systems that we've learned from the various spiritual traditions in the world and the healing traditions that I'm now talking about meet together and become indissolubly joined. So that's really why I'm urging people to get aboard these systems, learn what they are, what they can do, and to use them fully and effectively each and every day as a spiritual practice, as a practice to cleanse and purify the vehicle, the channels, and to open yourselves to higher order energies, which are undoubtedly there. You know, the reason that Reiki energy manifested at that time, in that place, to be photographed and be shown today, suggests agency was involved, because it wasn't my skill. I couldn't even recognize that the energy was there at the time in that form.
Well, and we had, was one of our guests, the Sharon Taggart, the photographer and author of the book Seance. She also runs or is part of the folks who run what is that town in upstate New York where they do all the great seance things every year? Yeah, it'll come to me. It'll come to me after we sign off. But she photographed a lot of spiritualist activities as they were occurring.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, look, I am not telling you what is happening. I do not pretend to know what is happening. All I'm telling you is that this is the undoctored photograph. That's it.
Yeah.
And her collection of things is spectacular. And her presentation at the IHS conference, I think it was 3 years ago. Unfortunately, we don't have that one recorded. Was really wonderful. But Shan is on a lot of programs so that you can easily find them. And of course, just one of our friends on Facebook too. So we can maybe put a link in there for folks who'd like to see some additional photographic evidence suggesting the existence of this energy field that is both tangible and present. It is not simply invisible, but it is moving through that spectrum. Yeah. Because that's what we're talking about, is a spectrum within our nervous system and our bodies, where the visible and the invisible somehow have to overlap and meet. It has to go from one to the other.
Absolutely.
At some point you don't see it, now you see it.
Yeah.
And I've told a lot of folks a good way to get involved with this is some kind of energy practice that is a healing practice, but also dowsing. You don't have to be terribly good at it, but just practice dowsing to get a sense of that connection between yourself and your environment. In some respects, I think that's what we're talking about here. And that's what the mysteries gave. They gave a connection to the person in not just the broader environment of the space, but the environment of the cosmos.
Yeah, I think as well in the context of the mysteries, we know from Samothrace that like 9 out of 10 people only took the first purification ritual. Okay, that was enough for them. Thank you. the 1 in 10 would go on to actually meet the deities, to become possessed by them. So yeah, I mean, this was fully recognized and understood in the ancient world. You know, most people just need the purification rites, and that's enough for this lifetime.
and that further indicates what a incredibly small number of adepts there would have been at any one time.
Yeah.
Because we have these initiates taking this who are at the top socioeconomic ladder. And of course, not everyone at that level is taking it, just these people. And of those, even a smaller number are going to move on to what we would say these are the adepts of that school or of that tradition.
Absolutely. So even among the devotees, as Plato said, very few are the adepts.
They got scared. That's enough for me. We're good.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you know, and we refer to that experience now. I think we pull it from Bulwer Lytton. I think the terror of the threshold.
Yeah.
You know, the terror of apparent reality. It's
yeah. So I wanted to mention, Mark, my forthcoming work this autumn winter.
Please do.
I wanted to talk about it because it's connected with what we've been saying, and it deals with the destruction of the mysteries of Eleusis.
Okay.
And what happened after that. Because so few people seem to know that whereas the sanctuary was destroyed at the end of the 4th century, the last Hierophant, Nestorius, and his son, Plutarch of Athens, who was a priest of Asclepius himself, taught Plutarch's daughter how to conduct the initiatory ritual of Eleusis and how to teach other people the practice of theurgy. And this young woman, Asclepiadina, throughout the next century, taught all of the major Neoplatonists, including people like Proclus and Damascius, initiated them and taught them how to practice theurgy. And that tradition continued throughout that century. So that in the following century, it was still continuing in Alexandria. Okay. And from Alexandria, the architects of the Hagia Sophia were called to Constantinople to design and build the Hagia Sophia, which they did based upon the spiritual principles. So that the forthcoming work is a recovery of the metaphysics and spiritual principles directly connected back through this golden chain to the mysteries of Eleusis. So people find ways of preserving and resurrecting the mystery rites and replugging in, so to speak, into that current. It's important for us to be aware of that. The current never dies, but our ability to connect to it varies somewhat from age to age.
Which is the sooner you get right with Saturn, the better it's going to be, because you're going to be able to connect with that. The sooner you connect, the stronger it will be for you in the future. And this is a question I often bring to many people. I say, well, you believe in reincarnation? They say, yes. I said, well, where do you think that's going to be? What do you mean? I said, well, where do you think it's going to be? Well, I don't know, probably here. Well, and what are you doing now to preserve this initiatic current for the future so that it's here for when you come back?
Yeah.
Oh, nothing. Well, then it probably won't be here for you. So not only are you stupid, but you're selfish too. Okay, we figured that part out. And I say that in all seriousness, that we have so much available to us now at the moment.
Yeah.
People don't think, I should say everyone, but far too many people, just as only 9 out of 10 took that initial step.
Yeah.
We see 9.5 out of 10 really only thinking about, oh, well, it's here for me now, and I don't have to think about the future or future generations. Oh, it'll be for them. So, the masters will protect it. Well, who do you think that is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
And there you're seeing, again, this was preserved by a thin, we talk about the golden chain, but it was a golden thread.
Yeah.
It was 2, 3, 4 people who kept that alive until it could grow again.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. And then when they couldn't, they embodied their thoughts, their beliefs in an architecture that has lasted, and it kind of preserves the system intact. The promise of non-duality as the Tower of Kronos.
And to some degree, we see that preserved in Masonic ritual.
Yes.
To some degree.
Yeah.
Well, this has been really wonderful having you here again. If there's anything else you'd like to say, please take the moment to leave us with your final thoughts. If not, that was beautiful.
It, really, Mark. My pleasure. Until next time.
And again, as soon as that book is out, let me know, and we'll have you back in the fall.
We'll talk about sacred architecture, non-duality, and the Tower of Kronos.
I'm excited. Send me the draft. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too, Mark. Take care.